2NURFM.com, a broadcast service of the University of Newcastle.
We like to check out what's been happening in the last 7 days in state and federal politics. We do that with the University of Newcastle's Associate Professor in Politics, Dr. Jim Joes. Jim joins me now. It's been a big week. One of the big issues, especially in the last 48 hours, has been the federal government's education reform. And your thoughts on that, Jim, with that imposing of, I think, 2%?
Yes, good morning, Dave. Yes, it's an interesting development, and it's a mixed development for primary schools, secondary schools. This is a big plus. For universities, for the university sector, it's largely a negative. And despite what the government might be saying in trying to say, well, look, under Labor since 2007, universities have fared, the tertiary sector has fared very well. And to some extent that is true. At least 40+% increase in funding over 5-6 years has been good for the universities. But remembering, of course, that that's come off a fairly low point reached towards the end of the Howard period of government. But having said that, the Labor government has benefited universities in many ways with its funding. It's now proposing to fund its primary and secondary reforms from the tertiary sector, in effect transferring money from one part of the education system to another. The negative impact for universities is, as you say, there'll be a 2% efficiency dividend that universities will be expected to somehow or other come up with. The cut from the Commonwealth is to the Commonwealth support for Commonwealth-funded places. And universities, universities are going to have to make up the shortfall.
Will it really impact on universities, do you think, Jim?
Oh, I think so. And even the better off universities will still struggle to absorb this 2% because, as a figure, 2% translates into different dollar amounts for each institution. One way that universities might seek to get around it will be to simply enrol more students to try and make up the gap, and that will definitely impact on student experience, the quality of education, because as you increase the numbers without necessarily increasing your infrastructure and supports, there is going to be a risk that the quality of education may be less than optimum. Alternatively, universities might choose to tighten the belt in various ways, and that too has the potential for impacting on students. But each university will have to assess this on their own particular merits, and hopefully will be able to weather this storm for a year or two without impacting too dramatically. As far as our university is concerned at Newcastle, it's going to be touch and go because we're one of the universities that are very much a regional and community-based university, and increasing more numbers or changing fee structures or whatever is not necessarily how we might want to go. But that's to be seen yet, because the detail of the Commonwealth reforms remains to be seen, and it also remains to be seen, Dave, as to how much of this will actually be implemented, because in part it depends upon a joint agreement between the various states, the territories and the Commonwealth. And while the reforms will go ahead regardless of how many states sign up, the extent to which they can be, that's to say the Commonwealth level of reforms can be successful, is in part dependent upon the cooperation of the states. At present, WA has said, we're not interested.
Very defiant.
I think the words of the Western Australian Premier were something like, Western Australia can't be bought. And I think pitching it like that sort of changes the whole politics and says, basically, we're not cooperating at this stage. What will happen come September the 14th with respect to the education reforms also remains to be seen, because the coalition hasn't yet really indicated whether it's going to come down in support of the Gonski reforms, that is to say the reforms recommended by Gonski, the man who chaired the inquiry and the report. So it remains to be seen, even if the Commonwealth sort of gets to, at this stage, at the end of this week, when the Council of Australian Governments meet and irons out some of these things, whether in fact it will last beyond September 14. That's an entirely, we can't predict where that will go, Dave, but the impact on the sector, it's really disappointing that the government sees that moving things around from one part of one sector to another part of the same sector, in a sense, is going to, achieve what it wants to do. But, maybe their hands are tied in various ways that we are, at present are unaware of. They're certainly looking for savings all over the place, as we've also seen with the plans for super, for example.
That's the other issue I wanted to talk to you about. Some changes in tax for superannuation. Your thoughts on that from what they're suggesting?
Well, briefly, the government's planning or floating. No, let me put it this way: it's being mooted by various people. We don't know precisely what the government's plans are. These are the discussion over super is, thus far, in the lead up to the budget, has been basically jockeying for position to ensure that particular policies are protected or not brought under threat. So, as I understand it, there was some talk that the government would look at the tax breaks given to higher income earners, people earning over $300,000, say, a year, and the degree of tax break that they're given. At present, there's a very generous taxation incentive given to people to put more money into super. So this benefits the upper income earners quite considerably. It also is as I understand it, we're talking $10 billion that the government foregoes in order to fund, shall we say, the tax breaks. At the other end of the scale, the government has committed over the past few years since 2007 to support strong superannuation for lower income earners. And one of its reforms has been to sort of ensure that low income earners have some form of superannuation savings for the future. Exactly what will happen in this space remains to be seen, but certainly most income earners wouldn't notice that if 10, 15, 20% was shaved off the upper income earners' taxation breaks, this would not affect the vast majority of Australians one iota. On the other hand, it remains to be seen whether the super is under the microscope in the budget or not. We need to wait and see what the budget brings down on that. The opposition have remained somewhat silent, referring to this as a sort of class warfare where the rich are being attacked. But one might argue that the upper income earners are sort of perhaps being asked to pay a little more of their share of tax rather than a little less, but that remains to be seen as well. The only thing that the opposition have brought out thus far on this, as far as I'm aware, is that they're not particularly interested in saving the lower income earning, protecting the lower income earners' superannuation, and are looking to remove that. Now, whether Mr Abbott changes his mind on that, because that's going to hit, shall we say, the less well-off people harder than it will hit the more well-off, perhaps who can afford the tax, the slightly different shift to their taxation structures when it comes to super. But again, Dave, we have to wait and see what the budget brings out on this one, because they're going to try and do the impossible again and bring down a close to balanced budget in a situation where there are a number of big ticket items for government policy expenditure that the Gillard government is strongly committed to, the education reforms, the disability insurance scheme, etc. So it's going to be interesting to see how they make all the pieces fit, if indeed it's possible to do so, which I'm not overly confident.
Very interesting, and that budget will be an interesting one when that comes out. We'll look
Certainly
forward to
will,
that.
Dave.
Thank you for this morning, Jim.
Yep, my pleasure.
Joining us from the University of Newcastle, Associate Professor in Politics, Dr. Jim Joes. He joins us every Tuesday morning here at 2NURFM.